Well, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
For those of you that don't know who I am, my name is Aaron Walling, and I serve on staff here as the pastor to adults 30s and 40s. Don't worry, this isn't normally how I sound. I've lost my voice over the last week, and so I'm hoping to get it back soon. But this is what you've got for the night. So it's a pleasure to speak with you tonight. Over the last few weeks, you guys have been going through a study looking at different characters in the Bible. You guys have talked about Joshua and Samuel, Elijah and Elisha. So tonight we're going to conclude that study by looking at one final person, Judas. Well, I'm going to cheat a little bit. We're going to look at Judas, but then we're also going to look at one other person at the same time. And we're going to consider the similarities and differences between them. Now, you might be asking yourself, Judas? Really? What can I learn from Judas? Well, that answer is pretty simple. There's a lot you can learn from him. But tonight, we're going to look at just one story, just one brief passage from the book of Mark. And as we go through that passage, our main question will be this: what is Jesus worth to you? What is Jesus worth to you?
I like that.
So if you have your Bibles, go ahead and open them to Mark chapter 14. We're going to be starting in verse 3. So as you turn there, allow me to set the stage a little. We're at the very end of Jesus' ministry. He spent the last 3 years traveling all around Galilee, in Samaria and Judea, performing many miracles, healing countless people, teaching about the kingdom of God. And now, the hour approaches for the ultimate reason why he came. At this point, he's become a dramatically polarizing figure in the region. Many people love him. They want to get close to him. They want to hear what he has to say or see what he'll do next. They're enamored by the miracles and what he's able to do, or his teaching and how it's different from anything they've heard before. But then there's others that despise him. They think he threatens their power, their way of life. They believe in their minds that he's leading the people astray, that something must be done. See, the whole region is wrestling with the question of who is Jesus and what will we do about it? That's the backdrop of the story that we're looking at this evening. So if you will, read along with me, Mark 14, starting in verse 3. And while he was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining at table, a woman came with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard, very costly. And she broke the flask and poured it over his head. There were some who said to themselves indignantly, "Why was the ointment wasted like that? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor." And they scolded her. But Jesus said, "Leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. For you always have the poor with you, and whenever you want, you can do good for them. But you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for burial. And truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her." Then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. And when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money. And he sought an opportunity to betray him. As we consider the question tonight of what is Jesus worth to you? I want to ask 3 additional questions to help us reflect on our answer to the main question. And the first one is this: is Jesus worth giving up something for? Is Jesus worth giving up something for? Before we get to Judas, let's talk about the woman. Mark doesn't even mention what her name is. But if we read this account in John's gospel, we find out that her name is Mary. Not Mary, the mother of Jesus, not that Mary. This Mary is the brother of Lazarus, the Mary of the story of Mary and Martha, the one who sat at Jesus' feet to hear his teaching, the one that while her sister Martha worked around the house and was busy and anxious of all the things they had to do, who complained to Jesus because Mary wasn't helping her. And Jesus said that she had chosen the good portion and it wouldn't be taken from her. That's the Mary that we're talking about here. So what does Mary do? She comes to Jesus with an alabaster flask of pure nard. She breaks it, and then she pours it over his head. The alabaster flask would have been imported from Egypt. And the nard would have likely come from as far away as northern India. Both of these things would have been expensive and rare. Mary wouldn't have had a lot of these lying around. It's most likely that this is the only one that she had. It would have been difficult to replace, and she would have valued it greatly. Everyone else in the room certainly did. But in a lavish display of love for Jesus, Mary takes the jar and breaks it, and then pours the nard over Jesus, anointing him. Hear that again. She broke the jar. She didn't just exhaust the perfume that was in it. She didn't just pour out the jar's contents. She rendered it useless for anything else. The jar would never be the same again. It could never again be used for this purpose. She gave up not only what was in the jar, but the vessel itself. This was a complete act of worship. How much did this act of love and worship cost her? More than 300 denarii. Now that number may not necessarily mean much to you, so let me give a little bit more context. 1 denarii was equal to about 1 day's worth of work for the average person. So you would have to work almost a year in order to buy this perfume. A year's worth of work. And Mary spent it on Jesus. But what about you? What is Jesus worth to you? Are you willing to give up something for Jesus? In Matthew 13, Jesus told 2 parables about the kingdom of heaven. First, he said, "The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field." And then he told another parable. And he said, "The kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls, who on finding one pearl of great value, went and sold all that he had and bought it." You see, Jesus is telling us that eternal life, access to the kingdom of heaven, the gospel, is worth giving up something to obtain. Its value is immeasurable. And here's the simple truth. Following Christ cost you something. Romans 12:1 says that we are to present ourselves as a living sacrifice, which is our spiritual worship. Hear that again. Present yourself as a living sacrifice, which is your spiritual worship.
Yes.
Worship involves sacrifice. Worship requires you to give up something. Don't believe me? Read the book of Leviticus. I know it's everybody's favorite book. You get lost in the details of the sacrifice and all of the laws and all of the things that they can and can't do, and you lose sight of the fact that the main purpose of Leviticus is it's God teaching his people how to worship him, how to live within a relationship with him. You see, worship costs us something. Every sacrifice in the Old Testament served as a reminder of who God is, who we are, and why we need him. Worship in the temple, worship in the tabernacle, it all centered around sacrifice. Worshiping God costs you something.
Yes.
There's a price. For Mary, it was a year's worth of work in the form of expensive, hard-to-get perfume. For you, it probably looks a little different. Maybe it's the 10% that you know you should be giving to the church each month. Maybe it's that relationship that's become far too physical. Or maybe it's not physical at all. Maybe it's that friend from high school who you know is a bad influence on you. Maybe it's your Sunday mornings, even after a late night before. Or maybe it's that dream job that you're working so hard for. What God asks you to give up is between you and him. But the same question remains for all of us. Are you willing to give up something for him? Or are you stuck on question number 2, which is this? Is Jesus only worth what you can get out of him? Is Jesus only worth what you can get out of him? As Mary performs this amazing act of love, there's an immediate backlash. Some in the room question this decision. They're indignant. They're angry. They see this act as incredibly wasteful. So much could have been done with that money instead. But the truth is their hearts aren't pure. There's something else going on. Mark doesn't tell us who got mad. He's much more diplomatic. He just leaves it as, some of the guys, they didn't like it. If you read John's account, John, being the son of thunder that he is, has no problem walking in going, it was Judas! Judas is the one that started it. You see, Judas was mad about what Mary did. And it had nothing to do with the poor. That was simply a pretense for his anger. You see, John tells us that Judas wanted the money for himself. That Judas wanted them to donate it so that it would go into the common money bag, which, oh, by the way, he was in charge of. And every now and then he would reach in and help himself. Judas wanted the money for himself. He knew exactly how much the jar of nard cost. He's the one that names the price. And it's in that moment that we can start to get a glimpse at Judas's motivation. Very early in Jesus' ministry, he called together and named 12 apostles. 12 people whom he would pour into like no one else. 12 men who would see and hear more than any other follower. They were with him for 3 years. They heard his teaching. They saw his miracles. They witnessed how he lived. They knew him better than anyone else. Jesus showed himself to them more than anyone else. He talked more openly with the apostles than he ever did with the crowd. And Judas was one of the 12. He had spent the last 3 years following Jesus all across Galilee, Samaria, and Judea. He had witnessed everything, but something was off. You see, he had never reached the point of giving up something for Jesus. Instead, he only looked for what he could get from him. All he was concerned with is what's in it for me? What do I get out of all of this? And so when he doesn't get a portion of the ointment, and when he doesn't get the validation he's looking for from Jesus in his indignation, the facade comes crashing down. The whole house of cards falls to pieces, and he can no longer hide who he truly is. Just look at what he does next. See, immediately after this episode, right after witnessing Mary in this extreme and lavish act of worship, right after that, what does Judas do? He goes to the chief priests and offers to betray him. When it became clear that Jesus would not conform to the image that Judas had built in his mind, Judas seeks to extract the final bit out of him that he can. Rather than give up something for Jesus, Judas looks for what he can get out of him. When Judas no longer got what he wanted from Jesus, he started looking for what he could get for Jesus. He offered him to his enemies, and he sold him. And the price that he got for Jesus? 30 pieces of silver, which is equivalent to the price of a slave in the Old Testament. Judas sold Jesus to the priests like a slave. That was how Judas viewed Jesus. He was an object to use for his own gain, one that could be discarded when the price was right. But don't miss this. There was far more involved in this transaction than just Jesus and 30 pieces of silver. You see, Judas didn't read the fine print. And I know most of us probably don't either. But when this transaction closed, Judas would learn that he sold more than just his friend and confidant. He sold himself too. Judas sold his soul at the same time that he sold Christ. He didn't just betray Jesus, he betrayed himself too. If all you're looking for is what you can get out of Jesus, what you can get from him, what he can give to me, then you will miss him every time. Every time. Just like Judas.
That's good.
See, Judas had a front row seat. He had the inside track. Judas had the privilege to witness firsthand what we can only believe on faith. But he missed it. He missed it. How? How did he squander such a perfect opportunity? This is how. Because proximity can never replace repentance. It didn't matter how close he was to the Lord, because he never viewed him as Lord. He never submitted to him as Lord. Maybe he wanted Jesus to seize power from the Romans and physically rule as king. Or maybe he just wanted to enrich himself by attaching himself to this miracle-working man. Whatever the reason, Judas never got it. And that should be a massive lesson for us. You can come to church. You can have Christian friends. You can participate in all of the religious activities that you want to. But if you do not know Jesus as Lord and Savior, then you have nothing. If you're only here looking for what's in it for you, then you have nothing. Because this isn't about you. It's not about me. It's about the Father in heaven. It's about a good and gracious God, a holy God, a merciful God who offers himself to us, but deserves all that we have. It's about a God who demands that we hold nothing back. Which brings us to our final question for the evening. Is there something in your life that you value more than Jesus? Is there something in your life that you value more than Jesus? Notice what Jesus says when he's confronted about Mary. He says, she has done what she could. Mary didn't hold anything back. The expensive perfume represented all that she had to give. There was nothing more she could do. She gave Jesus the best of what she had because she believed he deserved it. For Mary, there was nothing more valuable than Jesus. Judas, on the other hand, clearly valued things above Jesus. It's evident in his willingness to betray him, that he was willing to sell him for such a low price only highlights all the more Judas's incredible lack of value in Jesus. Judas wanted money and riches. He probably wanted power and fame. He probably wanted to be associated with the King of the Jews who overthrew their Roman oppressors. But Jesus would have none of that. And Judas couldn't let go of those things to serve him. Who are you most like this evening? Mary or Judas? For many of you, there may be a natural recoil to the thought of being like Judas. Some of you are like, I would never. Yes, you would. And I know because I've been there. I can say yes, you would, because I also have to say, me too. There have been many times in my life where I've clearly been Judas. There have been many times when I've valued things over Jesus, where I've sought him for only what I could get from him, what he could give me, and not simply for who he was. Don't get me wrong, I wanted Christ in my life, but I wanted other things too. It was, I want Jesus plus, not Jesus only. To give you an example, for me, one of the things that I valued most was marriage. Now, marriage is a wonderful thing.
Yes.
It is a gift from God. It was ordained by him in the very beginning. Marriage can make us more like him. It's a picture of Christ's relationship to the church. And we can gain a greater insight into Jesus' love for us through a marriage relationship. But the problem comes when we elevate it beyond its rightful place. See, don't be misled. Marriage is extremely hard. Anytime you put two broken, sinful people together, you're going to have issues, especially when those two people live together, share finances together, have to sleep in the same bed together. My wife can attest that that is especially difficult for her because I snore really loud. I don't like to admit it. I try to deny it, but there's a lot of video evidence. And so it's difficult to live with another person. Marriage is difficult. And if you don't have Christ in the center of that, if you don't value Christ above that, then you're just setting yourself up to fail. You're asking to walk in misery and sorrow, bitterness and contempt, instead of peace and joy. When I was younger, I didn't understand that. I valued being married far more than I valued Jesus in my life. I had elevated it far beyond what God intended it to be. I had placed it on a pedestal that it had no hope of living up to. See, what happened is marriage had become an idol in my life. Anything you value more than Jesus is an idol. And God is quite clear that we shall have no other gods before him.
Yes.
Idols are our own homemade gods, crafted in our hearts and minds in evidence of our lack of value in him. So what about you? Is there something in your life that you value more than Jesus? In a setting like this, it can be very easy to say, no, of course not. I would give everything for Jesus. We sing those words and that thought all the time. But consider your everyday life. How often do you choose TV or hanging out with friends over reading your Bible? How often do Sunday mornings become your chance to sleep in instead of serving or worshiping? How often do you choose your own comfort or convenience over sharing the gospel with your friend or neighbor? We haven't even got to the big stuff yet. If Jesus asked you to quit your job, would you do it? If he asked you to move overseas to a third world country where you didn't know a single person, would you do it? If he asked you to give a year's salary simply for the glory of his name, would you do it? If an act of worship would cause you to be scolded or ridiculed by those around you, would you still worship him? If following Jesus cost you your friends or family, would you do it? Now, he may never ask you to do any of those things, but that's not really the point. The point tonight isn't so much what is he calling you to do, as it is what are you willing to do? If he calls, will you say yes? If you say anything else, then he's not Lord. You may know him as Savior, but you don't fully know him as Lord. If Jesus is Lord of your life, the only answer you can give is yes.
Yes.
Because nothing will be more valuable to you than he is. What is Jesus worth to you?
Yes.
Let's pray. Every head bowed, every eye closed. If you're here tonight and there's something between you and the Lord, if there's something that you need to give over to him, then use this time right now to do just that. Maybe you're here and you've never trusted Christ as Savior. If that's you, then let today be the day of salvation. You can come find me or one of the other leaders here. We'd love to talk more about it with you. In a moment, the band's going to play a song of response. How do you need to respond to Christ tonight? You can do business with God right in your seat. Or if you want, you can come up and you can use these steps as an altar. Whatever you need to do, you can do it now. Father, I thank you for who you are. God, you are worth all that we have, because all that we have comes from you. Lord, I pray that each of us would examine our hearts, that you would reveal the idols in our life. God, show us where we have undervalued you. Convict us, Father, of our idolatry. Draw us back to you, into your infinite grace and mercy, your overwhelming forgiveness, and your immeasurable loving kindness.
Yes, God.
How could we put a price on you, Lord? Help us to know you more. Help us to give our all for you. Help us to offer ourselves as living sacrifices in worship and devotion to you. And we ask all of this in the wonderful and holy and powerful name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.